Talking to Sean Wheelock on the Fight Report, commentator for Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, as well as other promotions as well. So, make sure to follow him on social media. We'll talk about Polaris, his MMA, also grappling project as well. And I know you've got like a ton in the works, Lion fights. You've also done fights for M1 Global as well. So appreciate you, Sean, being on the Fight Report once again. And of course, we're coming on the heels of, KnuckleMania, which was a huge event for Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. I would dare to say, I didn't see the numbers, but this is probably the highest ranked pay-per-view of all time for Bare Knuckle Fighting. So, just tell us about that experience of being part of the one weekend, Super Bowl weekend. Pretty much a great event. It's, sold out, lots of fans, which is very rare during these times.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And again, thanks for having me. Always good to see you, my friend. I always think about the time at the UFC Hall of Fame with Art Davian, hanging out and getting to meet you there in Las Vegas. Summer of 2018 and July of 2018. There have been levels with Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. Just over my shoulder, you see two frame fight posters, UFC 1 and an original BKFC 1. And BKFC 1 was June 2nd, 2018. There was a lot of media on that. We got a lot of attention, and that was the first step. The next in June of 2019, when we had the Paulie Malignaggi Artem Lobov main event. And then this was an even bigger step. I'm not privy to the pay-per-view numbers either, but the reaction that I've received just from my friends in the fight community. A week later, I was commentating Muay Thai with Lion fight on UFC Fight Pass, and the fighters wanted to talk to me about that. And listening just to what people have said, I've seen the social media, it was huge. And I would venture that it was far and away the biggest. I've heard a couple of industry, not fight industry, but pay-per-view industry people say that it doubled the projections. And I don't doubt that. It was amazing. It was just a huge crowd. They socially distanced it. They followed all of the state and county guidelines in Florida, and they sold every seat. It was a VIP only crowd. There were NFL players, wrestlers from WWE. There were top 10 in the world pro boxers. There were loads of UFC fighters there. And then some of the best fighters on the BKFC roster were in attendance as well. It was an amazing show, an amazing event. And I'm just so proud to be with Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship.
Definitely. And, obviously the main event was Paige Van Zant versus Britain Hart. Women's BKFC main event. I'm not sure the women have headlined BKFC. I know Beck Rawlings, she competed a number of times for Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, but I'm not sure if this is the first main event featuring a woman. But talk about that. I know you've known Paige Van Zant pretty well from N1 Global. You guys have done commentary together. And so what was it like to be able to finally call her fight?
Yeah, it was really cool. And it was funny because when I was doing my fighter meeting with Paige, I was talking to her about the fact that, we've done these fighter meetings together, and I've given her husband, Austin Vanderford, a fighter meeting before a couple of times in Chael Sonnen's promotion, Submission Underground. And the first time I met him, when I don't even know if they were engaged yet. I think they may have just been boyfriend, girlfriend in Victory Fighting Championship. But it was interesting for her to be on that side of the fighter meeting. Paige, I'm very good friends with both Paige Van Zant and Austin Vanderford, and envoy. I knew that David Feldman, who's the founder, the CEO of Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, was interested. And literally the day they got back from Abu Dhabi, I was on the phone with Austin talking about the experience. It was really just me being an envoy. It had nothing to do with the contract. I had nothing to do with how much she got paid, nothing on the terms. I was just saying, look, I'm calling as a friend. I think this is a great fit. I've been treated beautifully. I've been commentating since the beginning. I was with David Feldman as a regulatory consultant 2 years before BKFC even launched. So I've been with Dave Feldman now 5 years. First-class guy, first-class promotion. They treat fighters right, and I think there's huge opportunity. And that's what got it going. And then I stepped back because I felt that was my role, and this is how it happened. But despite the loss, I'm so happy for Paige, though, because she's going to do great in this promotion. And look, they're all world-class athletes, and it hurts to lose. It's terrible to lose, but she still, I think, elevated the opinion of a lot of people despite the loss, that, this isn't someone who's just pampered. This isn't, pardon the pun, but a Barbie doll type person. Paige Van Zant is a phenomenal fighter and a phenomenal athlete. and she lost to a really, really good fighter in Britain Hart. And something Chris Lytle and I talked about on the commentary, and we talked about it privately too before the broadcast, is it was not a soft landing. It was not a squash. You know, Sean, Britain Hart had come in with 3 bare knuckle fights, including one in November. And she also has 11 pro boxing matches. And if you break down her pro boxing record, she's fought two fighters who went on to win world titles. And she fought a fighter I actually commentated in the Roy Jones Jr. boxing promotional series, a woman who had been #1 ranked amateur in the United States. So Britain Hart was used to tough competition. She was used to bare knuckles. She was used to being in big fights. And they both threw down. It was a very good fight. And it was Britain Hart's fight. And I don't think that diminishes anything about Paige VanZant. And at the same time, this was the moment of her life for Britain Hart. You know, so often she's been that other fighter, and this time she was the fighter, and just a phenomenal night for the promotion.
Definitely. I mean, you know, you watch the press conference, and then you kind of watch the weigh-in, and you could see Britain Hart just seem to be offended or disrespected just by the presence of Paige VanZant at that point. And so you knew that this was going to be a one fight to remember. And obviously, you know, Britain, you know, she was tough. She came in there, and, you know, Paige was able to, you know, take what she had and keep going. But when you have an exciting matchup like that, and I think that late in the game, when you have that kind of weigh-in, it goes viral. People are, you know, what is this going on now? Because I don't remember Paige VanZant having anything like that with her opponents in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And so many people, you know, my fight friends asked me, was that a work? I was like, no, it absolutely wasn't a work. It was an organic moment. And Britain Hart will tell you she is a big Paige VanZant fan, but she was in a mindset where she was coming prepared. She didn't want to be disrespected. Paige VanZant was not going to be intimidated. She didn't want to be disrespected. And the moment happened, but it was absolutely organic. And you're right, it went viral. It helped the fact that we did a 1 hour fully produced weigh-in show, which is the best weigh-in production we've ever done. Oftentimes we don't even televise the weigh-ins of BKFC.
Right.
We did a full multi-camera production. Jeff Houston hosted. I did it with Chris Lytle from a commentary table. And so it was a great production, and it went viral immediately. I was live on Fight. It was live on the Knuckle app. And then the video circulated on YouTube and throughout social media. And then there's no doubt it helped the promotion. What I look back at, Sean, you think about what this says for Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, and specifically Dave Feldman. He signs Paige VanZant. You know, he's brought some big fighters in. My broadcast partner, Chris Lytle, who I think should be in the UFC Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Hector Lombard, you know, who was the middleweight champion when we were in Bellator together, and was in the UFC and was in the Olympic Games. Nico Hernandez, who's an Olympic bronze medalist. Dave Rickles, who fought for the Bellator 155-pound title. Thiago Alves, you know, Rico Rodriguez, DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley, former WBO 140-pound world champion, is fighting on our card next month. So there have been huge names, but the difference with Paige VanZant is actually twofold. One, she's 26 years old, so she is absolutely in the prime of her career. Mm-hmm. And that's not happened with Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship before, getting a fighter at the absolute prime of their career. No disrespect to anybody else, but that's just how the math plays out. Secondly, Paige VanZant has transcended into popular culture. You know, my mom knows who Paige VanZant is. My mom doesn't know who Cyborg Santos is, but my mom knows who Paige VanZant is. And that's from Dancing with the Stars and seeing her on Good Morning America. And so she brings that appeal as well. Mm-hmm. So you have that factor then, and this is where I really give credit to David Feldman and Nate Shook, our matchmaker, and the entire BKFC team, and really philosophy. They could have given Paige VanZant a squash, bro. You know that, I know that. They could have gotten her an absolute B-side opponent and set up for a squash, and they didn't. They gave her a hard landing. They made her prove herself on the first fight. And she fought hard, and she wasn't dropped. She didn't get knocked out. She lost a decision, 49-46, 4-1 across the board. But they gave her a really tough fighter. Again, in Britain Hart, who had 3 bare knuckle fights, was coming off of a win in November, also 11 pro boxing bouts, and most of all, who was not awed or intimidated. That speaks volumes to the promotional mindset of BKFC, because really, how many fight promoters out there would not have set up a squash for Paige Van Zant. And David Feldman just wasn't going to do that. He wasn't about that.
Definitely. And, obviously, David Feldman has the mindset of, where they can take this promotion next. Obviously, Paige Van Zant has more value, losing to a fighter like Britain Hart, and maybe she just went by and beat a nobody. And, I'm sure she's going to be given, I know someone else who's notable in her next fight. We know that she'll return this summer. So when you look at that anticipation that builds for, Paige Van Zant, you think she's going to headline again? Would it be like a co-main event to a title fight? Where do you think that they would put her on?
Yeah, Sean, it's a great question. I have nothing to do with the matchmaking. If I'm asked, which I am occasionally, I'll give my opinion on certain fighters. But when it comes to the run of the card, I have no idea. The fight guy in me tells me, you have someone as big as Paige Van Zant, you're not gonna make her TV2 on the card. Mm-hmm. She's probably main eventing or at least co-main eventing. I'm just speculating, but what I do know, which is not speculation, is Paige Van Zant wants in immediately. If there were a slot for her on this March card, I think she would be on that. She wants to come back immediately. And Chris Lytle will tell you there is a tough learning curve in bare knuckle. Chris Lytle tells the story, the phenomenal UFC career he had. And then if you do a deep dive into Lytle's career, he was 13-1-1 as a pro boxer. I'll go so far as to say that no one at a high level in MMA has ever had a pro boxing career better than Chris Lytle. Now, there have been better boxers than Chris, right, who then flopped in MMA. Our Jimerson, was top 10 in the world at 190 pounds. Ray Mercer had whatever that was against Kimbo Slice. Even Melton Bowen was the late Melton Bowen, who fought in the UFC for Art Davie, was just outside of the top 10 as a heavyweight, but they all flopped. And there are other examples of that too. But if you look at boxers who had really good careers, Marcus Davis comes to mind. KJ Nunes was a pretty good boxer, but no one was better than Lytle. 13-1-1 as a boxer. Again, I think Hall of Fame worthy UFC career. Chris comes into bare knuckle. This is before BKFC, fights in BKB in England. And Chris said for the first round, he couldn't figure out what to do. And then something switched in his brain and he figured it out. But he said, even with all that experience and a guy in his 40s who'd been fighting professional for 20 plus years, and it took him a while. And there is that learning curve. It's not an easy sport to adapt. Doesn't matter how many boxing matches you've had, or kickboxing, or MMA, or leadweight, or submission grappling, or Muay Thai, or anything else. There is a deep dive when you enter MMA into that, bare knuckle, into that proverbial pool. Right. And you just have to figure it out quickly. I have no doubt that whoever the next opponent is for Paige Van Zant, you're going to see a better Paige Van Zant. And I think she would be the first to tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, one guy that really made that transition really well was in that co-main event. And that, of course, was Johnny Bedford, who took on Dan Yoon. And Johnny Bedford, of course, he was a champion, I believe, on the regional scene. He had a stint in the UFC. But when he came into his own, we've talked about him before, bare knuckle fighting championship, it really elevated his status. And he became, the king of that division. And so going into this fight with that, how did you feel like that was going to play out? Did the fight kind of unravel how you thought it would, or was it much different than you anticipated?
Yeah, I know how strong in the clinch Johnny is, and I was surprised at how adept Dat Nguyen was in the clinch. Yeah. Because in his previous fight, he got dropped in the clinch in a half tie plum, single collar tie by Abdiel Velasquez. And that's the first time in bare knuckle or pro boxing, or amateur boxing for that matter, that Dat Nguyen had ever been down in a competitive fight. And I thought that Bedford would do extremely well in there. And I thought Dat Nguyen would do better at range. And as it turned out, Johnny Bedford did great at range, and Dat Nguyen did phenomenally well in the clinch. They're two world-class fighters. Dat Nguyen was just outside of the top 10 in boxing. And you mentioned Johnny Bedford. He was in the UFC. I commentated him season 1, year 1, 2010 in Bellator. He was on the undercard when we were in Texas. I think it was the 4th or 5th Bellator that I commentated in suburban Dallas. I think we were in Grand Prairie, Texas. I feel like with those two, if they fought 10 times, it would be 5 wins apiece. I like them both immensely. They're phenomenal guys. They're phenomenal fighters. And that was a really close fight. And I would love to see a rematch. Again, I have nothing to do with the matchmaking, but as a commentator, as a hardcore fan, I would love to see that rematch.
Yeah, I mean, same as well. I thought both guys performed excellent. And obviously, Johnny Bedford, just the evolve, he's made his career in bare knuckle fighting championship. That has to put a lot of, fighters on notice. Like, they can come in here and they can really put their name on the marquee.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And, Johnny Bedford has said repeatedly that bare knuckle is the perfect sport for him. What a phenomenal background. The guy was a Division I college wrestler at Cleveland State, where Stipe Miocic wrestled too.
Yeah.
He's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt under the great Jean-Jacques Machado. A great career. I don't mean a good. I think he had a great career in MMA, again, including time in Bellator and the UFC. And he was the first fighter to go 5-0 in BKFC. And in his sixth fight, trying to defend his title successfully, he loses against the guy who, again, was just out of the top 10 in boxing. It shows you the caliber of athletes that David Feldman, Nate Shook, the matchmaker for Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, are able to attract. And it's not just a place for guys who can't make it or guys who are past their career. Again, I think anyone can look at Johnny Bedford, and it's not a stretch of the imagination to see him doing extremely well and winning in a major promotion, including the UFC. And no stretch of the imagination that you can see Dan Nguyen, being a fighter that's hovering around the top 10 in the world. And yet here they are in Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, which speaks volumes for this promotion. And, there are little stages, when Paulie Malignaggi signed, people took notice. When Thiago Alves signed, people took notice. My buddy Hector Lombard, people took notice. Joe Riggs, another good friend of mine, people took notice. Lytle. And then Paige Van Zant comes in, and more fighters are now seeing that as an option. I experienced something similar, although it never carried through when I was in Bellator. And, I was in Bellator from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And Roger Huerta signed right after I signed, actually. And at the time, Roger Huerta was a pretty big deal in MMA, and he'd been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And a lot of fighters who didn't really even know what Bellator was or just would dismiss it, thought, if Roger Huerta is going to Bellator, I can go to Bellator. And not that Paige Van Zant is Roger Huerta or Bellator is BKFC, but I think it's a fairly apt comparison that it creates awareness. So world-class fighters in their prime are saying, you know what? I do have another option. That option is BKFC.
Definitely. And then another fight, of course, was Chris Lieben. I wanted to mention him because this is the final fight that he says of his career when he get the first round knockout over Quinton.
I believe him. Yep. And I believe Chris. I think Chris is finished. I've gotten a chance to know Chris. He's someone who I've long admired and a big fan. And I had never met him, and I got to meet him. As 3 fights now I've commentated for him. We had open tryouts at the gym where I actually trained. I just came with my 15-year-old daughter and was doing her Muay Thai American Top Team Kansas City, and there were open bare knuckle tryouts there. And it's not a gym that I own. We just trained there.
Right.
And Chris Lieben was in town, and he was so nice. And I was running something, and my wife left something in the car, and he said, "Oh, I'll go and get it for you." I mean, what a nice human being, little things like that. What a first-class guy. And I've told him, I told Lytle the same thing. I told Thiago Alves this. For me, as a fight commentator and as a hardcore fight fan, fighters who essentially spent their careers in the UFC, and that's the one promotion, I think major promotion I haven't been able to commentate for whatever reason. So I never got to commentate their fights, but in bare knuckle, I got to do their fights, and it's a thrill. And I reminded Lieben of that. And then I talked to him afterwards. I'm like, man, I'm so honored. Not just that I got to commentate 3 of your fights. I got to know you. I got to develop a friendship, but I got to commentate your last fight. And if there's ever a way to finish, and Lytle and I were joking about it on air. We said that's the most Lieben-esque finish. Not only did he finish, did he knock out Quentin Henry, but he ate a massive shot right before he did it, and he walked through it. And man, that's just perfect for him. Quentin Henry, by the way, will be back. He is tough. Yeah. He is talented. He fought so hard. And, one loss certainly doesn't define a career. And, I think as much as it was terrible to lose for Quentin Henry, a small part of him who he had not acknowledged was a big Chris Lieben fan. But I have to say, okay, I didn't win, but that was pretty cool to be on that end of fight history.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, bare knuckle fighting championship, I have to say this card, top to bottom, really good. Like all the fights were pretty competitive all around. One last fighter I wanted to talk about was Brandon Lambert and Jared Grant. And Jared Grant with that big, knockout in the third round. That was a competitive fight. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. Just seeing these two guys, compete for the first time. I've seen Lambert, I know from MMA, from being in the Midwest, MMA, where he's from, but obviously seeing these guys perform, didn't know who was going to come out on top, but just thought it was really competitive and it was a fun finish as well.
Yeah, that fight touched the nerve. We had two fights on the free preview, and that was our first one. And a lot of people saw that. And I feel a lot of people wound up buying the pay-per-view because of that fight. It definitely touched a nerve. Brandon Lambert's a cool guy. I like him a lot. A lot of people say that he's a keyboard warrior or an internet troll. I disagree. The guy's passionate about fighting. He trained so incredibly hard for that fight, and he did very, very well. Jared Grant's a kid to watch. He's now 3-0 in bare knuckle fighting championship. He only had amateur boxing. He had never had a pro boxing bout. He had not done any other combative sports, including MMA, and he came into BKFC, and very quietly, he has reeled off 3 straight wins. And, just as we saw in the late 90s, you remember MMA started with UFC 1, November 12th, 1993. So by the late 1990s, we started to get those guys who came right to MMA and they didn't come from anything else. And I kind of feel like Jared Grant might be the first guy in that wave who come from bare knuckle. Okay, of course, he had about 50 amateur boxing bouts, but aren't coming like Dat Nguyen was from a great pro boxing career, Paige Van Zant from the UFC, that he comes from the AMAs into bare knuckle and he's going to make his mark there. And I like that kid a lot. Jared Grant, people are going to start paying attention to him. He's had the quietest 3-0 run in bare knuckle fighting championship. And if he goes to 4-0, I don't think it's going to be quiet any longer. He's a really good, respectful guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what bare knuckle fighting, will become, is like a sport of its own, that, fighters will be specifically, coming up trained for this. Maybe they'll be open to grappling and maybe doing some MMA or regular boxing bouts. But, I have to believe at this point, some are driven, to step into that BKFC, just toe the line and be a part of this promotion. It's very exciting. I mean, I don't think there's anything like this in the market right now. And I just think by the time, we're done with this pandemic and stuff rolls around, I'm sure that you guys will be doing more cities, there'll be more availability of this sport. Yeah,
and more states are going to open up. If you think about it, that poster behind me, BKFC 1, Cheyenne, Wyoming, June 2nd, 2018, was the first legal above ground sanctioned fight. I say above ground literally and figuratively, because sometimes these were done in basements. Some of these underground fights, they weren't just figuratively underground. But it took from 1889, which was the John L. Sullivan, Jake Kilrain fight in Richburg, Mississippi, all the way until 2018 to get the sport back. And now you see the states that it's legal. And I was on a presentation today on Zoom talking to a state athletic commission about it. I have another one tomorrow. Bare knuckle fighting championship continues to open up. But obviously, Sean, you know my relationship with Art Davie, who's essentially my surrogate dad, the man who created the UFC. You were there when he was enshrined in the UFC Hall of Fame, rightfully as the creator of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, because he is the creator of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, despite what some people, Campbell McLaren, might say. If you look at the arc, it's eerily similar. The arc of bare knuckle and David Feldman to Art Davie and MMA / the UFC. Where does Art Davie start? Colorado. Why? Because they had no athletic commission. Where does David Feldman start? Wyoming. Bare knuckle fighting championship. Read into this what you want, was 100 miles away from McNichols Arena, where UFC 1 was held in Denver. And Wyoming has a great athletic commission, by the way. They're just very open-minded. then where does the UFC start to go? They start to go into the South. They go to Alabama. They go to Mississippi. Where is bare knuckle fighting championship? In the South, Mississippi, Florida. Alabama is now legalized. I fully anticipate that we'll be in Alabama this year for BKFC.
Nice.
And then who are the states that are late adopters? Nevada, early on, the Nevada State Athletic Commission. This is when Bob Meyerowitz was owning the UFC. After he bought it from Art Davie, before he sold it to the Fertittas, Nevada's saying, yeah, we'll never legalize this sport. California said no. Missouri, which is the state that borders me to the east, about 15 miles from where I'm talking to you. I live in Kansas City on the Kansas side. Right. Missouri said, no, we're never going to do this. This is a horrible sport, MMA. We'll never do this. Now look where we are. And then New York comes in, same curve. I fully expect the last states to come in are going to be those resistors, just like they were in MMA, probably the bigger states. And you're going to see that arc. It's going to be through the Midwest. It's going to be through the South. It's going to be the smaller states, smaller in terms of geography, smaller in terms of population. Then eventually the states who said, no, this is awful, leading the majority, are in a tiny minority. But, you think about it. Obviously, UFC and UFC 7 was in Buffalo, New York, but then New York legally shut down professional MMA. It took until 2016 to bring it back. I don't think it's going to take that long in New York, but I think you're going to see that. Not everyone at once is going to jump up and say, oh, this is great. I love bare knuckle. Just like people didn't jump up and say, oh, this is great. I loved MMA. I mean, right. You probably remember as well as I do, Sean, the comments you used to hear on MMA. I mean, forget the 90s, even 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Oh, it's that dirty fighting, that cage fighting, that no holds barred stuff. Oh, it's barbaric. Oh, they kill each other in there. Yeah. And, now the fact that the UFC is on ESPN Plus, which is a Disney-owned platform. And bare knuckle is going to have the same evolutionary arc. There's no question about it. It's a sport, world-class athletes. There are 2 Olympians on the bare knuckle fighting championship roster. And it's just as legitimate as any other combat sport. It's not for everybody, but golf isn't for everybody either. Right. I get that.
Definitely. I think it has its place, among the combat sports fans. And it's growing, every time we see every event,
Yeah, brother, I'm telling you, I love it. I love it, and I'm so fortunate in my career. I mean, I commentate a wide array of combat sports, MMA, bare knuckle, obviously, boxing, Muay Thai, Letway, kickboxing, submission grappling, and I've commentated gi jiu-jitsu as well. And there's something special about commentating bare knuckle fighting championship. I'm not diminishing anybody else who I commentate for, past or present, but those 2-minute rounds, the ferocity, the intensity, the adrenaline, the camaraderie between the fighters, it is so special. It is so unique. It's not a coincidence that in my home office studio that I'm talking to you from in Kansas City, that my UFC 1 poster and my BKFC 1 poster is side by side, because BKFC 1, man, is the closest I will ever get to UFC 1. I watched UFC 1 as a kid in Shawnee, Kansas. My mom paid the $14.95. And obviously I know the stories from writing Is This Legal with Art Davie. Yes. And I was calling Art from Cheyenne. We speak every day anyway, but I was calling Art from Cheyenne saying, Art, I fully think that I'm emerged in what you felt in Denver in 1993. There's this buzz, there's this excitement, there's this camaraderie. It's us against the world. The fighters want to smash each other, but they're all kind of in this together. And that's what bare knuckle fighting championship is doing.
Definitely. And I think it's only a matter of time before it gets accepted, by the mainstream and whatnot. And, can you tell us a little bit about the next event bare knuckle has to offer in March, and, why you think fans are going to tune into this one off the heels of KnuckleMania, of course, which we hope this becomes a yearly, event. We love that name. KnuckleMania. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, it could be earlier. It could be the name of the major shows multiple times per year. But the KnuckleMania is just kind of a different branding to say that this is our big show. When I was at Bellator, I don't know what they call them now, but when I was at Bellator, we would call them the tentpole shows. Okay. So that was kind of our inside term. We didn't say that publicly, but these were the tentpole shows. When we did King Mo versus Rampage Jackson, that was the tentpole show. Or when we did Tito Ortiz versus Stephan Bonner. And so KnuckleMania, I believe, is going to be that. But we come right back on March 19th. We're in a city that's been extremely good to us. We did our second ever event there in August of 2018, Biloxi, Mississippi, which in the 90s, when they started with casino gambling, was one of the best boxing cities in the United States. I mean, if in the 90s, you talked about Vegas, Reno, Atlantic City, New York, and then Biloxi, Mississippi was right there. And they've kind of evolved from a boxing city to an MMA city to a bare knuckles city right now. So on that card, Leonard Garcia, who has never had a boring fight in his life, against Joe Elmore, who's never had a boring fight in his life and is 2-0 in BKFC, and maybe of the 5 most exciting fights in bare knuckle fighting championship history, those two guys have probably combined for 4 of them. So that's our main event. The co-main event, a fighter I referenced earlier, DeMarcus Chop Corley, former 140-pound WBO world champion in boxing. If you go look on Box Record on his Wikipedia page, you will see that he took Floyd Mayweather 12 rounds.
Oh, wow.
A phenomenal fighter. Had it not been for Mayweather, I think he would be a household name. He just got stuck in that Mayweather era in that weight class. But Chop Corley in his bare knuckle debut against Reggie Barnett. And Reggie Barnett, if he wins this fight, I fully expect him to fight that and to win. Chop Corley wins, maybe he'll fight that and to win. And that's something we have never seen before in bare knuckle. 2 high level, dare I say, world-class boxers against each other in bare knuckle. We've seen world-class MMA guys fight each other and world-class boxer versus MMA, but that would be interesting. It's not a title eliminator. I don't know the matchmaking, but I would have to say the winner would not be far off of a title shot. That's a phenomenal co-main event. What I saw in the social media comments, I'm not a huge social media guy. What I saw in the comments were so many people saying, I never watched BKFC before, and I watched it because of Paige. I watched the KnuckleMania, and now I'm hooked. Yeah. So, you go in levels, you go in stages, just like with the UFC. A lot of people never watched it until The Ultimate Fighter, and then you made fans that way. Or when I was at Bellator, it took us 4 years to get on Spike, and so many people when we were on Spike were like, yeah, I'd heard of Bellator, I'd never watched it before. I think that the audience now is there. They're aware of this. They understand what it is. If they had preconceived notions, they're gone because they saw how good our fights and our fighters are and how exciting the rule set is with the 2-minute rounds and the maximum of 5 rounds. And just the way that these fighters go after it, the frequency of knockouts, the frequency of knockdowns, the ferocity, the intensity. So to me, the momentum only continues to build. And I'm not privy to the schedule, but I have an idea of what they're doing. And I would say look for at least monthly shows and then hopefully more to follow after that.
Nice. We can't wait. And of course, getting back to the MMA side of things, you're doing so much, great work over there for all the promotions that you're covering. So, talk about that as well. I know you've done stuff with Polaris, which was a concept that you had originated from you and a few of your partners with the grappling side of things, and also, some of the different promotions you've done.
Yeah, so an MMA promotion I'm really excited about. I'll be commentating for them on UFC Fight Pass on March 5th, Saturday night, March 5th, is called FAC Fighting Alliance Championship. It's predominantly owned by James Krause, who's, such a great UFC fighter, and Joe Wooster, who's one of the best managers in the business. And it's their promotion. It used to be called KCFA, Kansas City Fighting Alliance, and they expanded it to be a bigger regional promotion. And, there was a hole when Victory Fighting Championship, which I adored, and I commentated for 3 years, 2016, 17, and 18, right after I left Bellator. Victory established itself as the top promotion in the Midwest. And I see so many fighters in the UFC. Anthony Smith, first and foremost, and in Bellator as well. Austin Vanderford, who came out of Victory. And FAC is doing that. I'm really excited about this promotion. They have really competitive, aggressive matchmaking. Kevin Kroom fought on FAC and then went right to the UFC and won. Yes. And it's a Midwestern pipeline now into the UFC. So it's called Fighting Alliance Championship. I'm also involved in Icon MMA. And there's a Brazilian promotion called Taura, 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 which I've done 2 shows with. I commentate that with Charles Rosa, Boston Strong, my buddy.
Nice.
So those are 3 MMA promotions I'm working with. So as much as I love bare knuckle, you know, I'm a fight guy. And if people are being hit in the head or having their limbs manipulated anyway, or having a choke cinched on, then I want to be there behind the microphone.
Yeah, definitely. And then when you're looking forward to this weekend's UFC, like who would you say is going to come out on top, you know, as a big winner? I mean, of this card coming up. You got Cyril Gagne.
It's a stacked card. I don't know, Sean. You tell me, brother. I want to hear from you. You tell me, what fight are you interested in?
I'm interested in Gagne and Rosenstruck. I'm interested in that fight. I think it's going to be a heck of a fight.
Rosenstruck's such a, and I like Rosenstruck. You know, it's unfair to call him an all or nothing fighter, but kind of an all or nothing fighter is that he's so aggressive. He hits so hard. And I don't mean this as a disrespect, because I'm a huge fan of his, but he can be open to getting hit as well. And, you know, in the UFC, they're all so big and strong. It's a cliche of heavyweights, but it really holds true in the UFC because their heavyweights are so athletic and so strong and so good, is that literally one strike, not one punch, but one strike, be it a kick, a knee, an elbow, or a punch, can turn the fight. That's what we've seen Rosenstruck in the past. I mean, you just look at the fight that we saw last week, the Derek Lewis bout. You know, those are 2 phenomenal heavyweights. You know, it's I think people have kind of lost sight of the fact. I'm glad you mentioned that fight, because I don't know if we're quite in a golden era for MMA heavyweights, but man, we're not far off. You know, MMA heavyweights have never been the glamour division the way boxing heavyweights have been. If you look at the history, you know, early on with UFC, it was open weight, obviously. But who was the first star to emerge? Royce Gracie, who's 6'2", 170 pounds at the time. You know, and even as ripped as Ken Shamrock was, he was about 205 pounds, 210. Yeah. You know, but we've never really seen it, maybe with Couture a little bit and Liddell, but they were really 205ers, weren't they? And Fedor Emelianenko, but he never broke through to the mainstream audience in the US the way he did with hardcores like you and me. So I just don't think that heavyweights in MMA have had the same cultural impact, at least in the US and Canada, that they have in boxing. But it is so deep right now in the UFC. And I say the UFC specifically, not MMA, but I'm saying the UFC specifically. It is so deep with their heavyweight roster right now. Phenomenal. I mean, a guy who I think is amazing, and he's really not even in the title picture, is Blagoy Ivanov. You know, but they have Augusto Sakai, who's phenomenal, who beat Ivanov. You know, those are 2 absolutely stellar heavyweights, and I don't even know if they're really close to a title fight where, you know, in a different era, I think those guys are the undefeated champions. It's a really, really good time for heavyweights right now.
I agree. I'm with you on that one. For this one, I'm thinking Gagne. I'm picking him for this one, you know, undefeated 7-0, but, you know, Rosenstruck comes out real strong, real heavy-handed, and that could be
lights out. Yes, he does.
You know? I mean, I was impressed with, you know, the win over Dos Santos, you know, and also Dontel Mays, a guy that you're familiar with, probably from the regional scene as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And he got big wins over there.
Yeah, no, I've commentated Dontel Mays as well. Yeah, it's you know, 5 years ago, I kind of felt like the UFC's heavyweight division was starting to get a little aged, and there were a lot of guys who seemed like they were just there because the UFC didn't have that many heavyweights. And now, again, the depth, the talent is so good, and they're emerging. And you know, I'm really impressed with it. I'm very much impressed with it. And you know, I'm the world's biggest UFC fan. I always am. And Art Davie is right there with me. You know, that it's easy for people and fight fans to cheap shot the UFC because they're the biggest. And oftentimes in human nature, people want to go after the biggest for whatever reason.
Of course.
I have the utmost respect for the UFC, for Dana White, for their matchmaking. They never protect fighters. I know some people will roll their eyes at that, but I firmly believe that they never protect fighters. They're not obsessed on record building. You know, I'm very close friends with Anthony Smith. You look at a guy like Anthony Smith. He's on a roll. He loses 2 fights. He comes back and he finishes Devin Clark, and now he's right back in it, you know?
True.
The UFC has always, and going back from Art Davie all the way through now with Dana White, and 27, now 28 years, UFC has always been about not what is your record, but who have you fought? Because they understand it's a Shark Tank, man. You know, if you're going to fight 5 of these guys, you're probably not going to come out 5-0. And even if you come out 2-3 and you fought really well in those other 3, or at least 2 of those 3, that's cool too. You know, boxing is so different. I love boxing. I commentate a few boxing series, including the Roy Jones Jr. boxing series. And I've been commentating more and more boxing, which I love. Boxing was my entry in that sports as a very small kid.
Sure.
5, 6 years old. My late father was a big boxing fan, but there was such a record obsession in boxing. You know, in MMA, if you see on a regional scene as a regional main event, you know, you see 8-0 against 7-2, it's like, yeah, what? You don't see that in boxing, man.
Yeah.
Because on a regional card, 8-0 is fighting 2-14, and it was a paid for bout, meaning that the management team of 8-0 paid the 2-14. It's not a work, but that's just the way you build records in boxing. Yeah. And MMA has avoided that. And that's first and foremost because of the UFC has avoided. Definitely. You know, Dana White could have really given soft landings to people like Sage Northcutt and Brock Lesnar and even CM Punk. And, you know, he didn't, and he never will. You know, again, it's the philosophy. Who did you beat? Not what is your record, but who, or I shouldn't even say who did you beat? Who did you fight?
Right. No, I agree.
Look, Cowboy Cerrone is the best example of that. Yeah. Donald Cerrone is the best current example of that, no question about it. You know, in the Art Davey era, the best example of that was David Tank Abbott.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, like, you know, the heavyweight, you know, you have Marcin Tybura, you've got this Tom Aspinall who just, you know, really came out and did really well in his last fight last weekend as well. I mean, it is so stacked at heavyweight. It's unbelievable, you know?
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bag on any of the other promotions, but outside of Vitaly Minakov, who lost to Czech Congo, and I don't even know his interest or his status right now, you know, the UFC really isn't missing anybody. You look at other weight classes and you see a guy in PFL or Bellator or even one championship, you think, yeah, the UFC would do well to have them. Again, outside of Vitaly Minakov, and you know, I watch a lot of MMA and a lot of international MMA, and I've been fortunate to work for a number of foreign promotion. There's really nobody out there that you would say, man, they should have. I mean, there are good heavyweights. They're definitely very good. You know, Czech Congo is still relevant. Ryan Bader is a great fighter, but no one that you would think, oh, the UFC would really benefit from having, the way that I always thought they would benefit from having Michael Chandler, and now they do, or the way that they would benefit from having Patricio Pitbull, or when Joe Warren was at his best at 135 pounds. I just don't see those heavyweights out there that the UFC does not possess.
No, and then they're really just growing. Like, and I think the division just is so sound. You know, Chris Daukaus, who got a big finish over Alexei Oleinik, that's his second promotional win as well. So, I mean, they're just grabbing all the heavyweights they can and really, you know, putting them on display.
Yeah, without question. And, you know, and again, it's competitive matchmaking. You know, you think how different the UFC would be and then de facto MMA would be if there was this record obsession. And, you know, the company I used to work for, I hate to say controversial things. I'm normally pretty vanilla ice cream, but let's face it, the company I used to work for, Bellator, they'll sign fighters to one-fight contracts, and they're coming in as the B side. And I have a few good friends who've been the B side who have lost, and it was a good opportunity and good money. UFC doesn't do that. They're not signing people to one-fight contracts to build somebody up. And Bellator does that, you know, fairly, unfairly, rightly, wrongly, whatever. It's a promotional philosophy, but they do that. The UFC doesn't, and the UFC never has.
Definitely. Well, we can't wait to see, you know, more heavyweights come back to the bare knuckle fighting championship. That was another question I wanted to ask you, is like, when are we going to see, you know, the heavyweights come back to BKFC and, you know, and see that title on the line as well?
Yeah, I don't know the date. You know, if I had to guess, I would say the April or the May card, I think is a pretty good guess. Sam Shoemaker, who has been determined to have his next fight against the champion Joey Beltran, they were both at KnuckleMania at the beginning of February. They were doing publicity. So that fight has been announced that it will happen. I don't know when. Again, my best guess is April or May. I know both men want it to happen very, very quickly.
Oh, that's going to be an exciting one as well. And then, as we move forward, with 2021, the anticipation is huge, not just for UFC, for all the different promotions as well. And then there's so many great fights that are coming out. What do you think is one thing that should be highlighted this year that you haven't seen previous years, whether it be a weight division, whether it be, a style of fighting, or, maybe a fighter that, we've completely overlooked the past couple of years?
Yeah, here's what I like where we are in the state of fighting right now. I feel like people are really open-minded, and the most open-minded they've probably been since the early 90s. One of the series I commentate is World Lightweight Championship. And when that moved to UFC Fight Pass 2 years ago, so many people mentioned to me about that. A lot of people had not even heard of Lightweight. It's still the most pronounced word in all of combat sports. That people were open, man, this is so cool. And people were cool, with bare knuckle and trying different things. When Invicta MMA with the Phoenix Rising series in my home state of Kansas, we're doing the one night 8 women tournaments. People seem like they're open to different ideas, different things. And I really, really like that. I think too, there's the continual upswing in jiu-jitsu, which I love and I'm so happy for. I'm a huge grappling head. I love grappling. I'm still stupid enough to grapple. I love grappling. I was never a great striker. I'm not a great grappler, but I'm at least mediocre. Nice. I never got the mediocre as a striker. But what's so cool for grappling is that stars can come in. And, if you're a big star in the UFC, at most, unless you're Donald Cerrone, who's going to fight 4 times a year, at most you're going to fight 3 times a year. And it's probably going to be twice a year with that roster size. Mm-hmm. But you can still make some money, have some exposure, get a competitive outlet, be in front of people, get on a broadcast by doing grappling. So, I have my grappling promotion in Kinektic. I commentate for Chael Sonnen and Submission Underground. You'd mentioned Polaris earlier. I think that's great promotion. Eddie Bravo has just done wonderful things for it. I'm happy to see Third Coast is another really good grappling promotion. So much good grappling out there, which I love. I love the freshness. I love the innovation that's going on in combat sports right now. Not that it was ever stale, but it just seems like people are more open-minded. I'll give Letway a try. I'll like, I want to watch that. I want to watch bare knuckle. At the top of the interview, you mentioned that I'm now with Lion Fight, the best Muay Thai promotion in the world.
Nice.
We had our debut on UFC Fight Pass 2 weeks ago. People are in the Muay Thai, and I love that. Like I said, I'm a fight fan, and some people just like MMA, or they just like boxing, or they just like jiu-jitsu, and that's cool. I'm a fight fan. I love it all, and I love to commentate it all.
Yeah, same here, man. And we appreciate you again, Sean, for being on the Fight Report today. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. Go ahead if there's nothing else you have to add.
I appreciate it. I always like to plug the book, so you have a copy, but the book, which is soon to be a major motion picture. I'm waiting for the official announcement, but soon. So for those of you not familiar who need a refresher, so Art Davies is the creator of the UFC. He's enshrined in the UFC Hall of Fame as such. I wrote with Art his memoir, which is called "Is This Legal?" The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it. Again, it's going to be a major motion picture very, very soon. I think there'll be a big announcement on that. In the meantime, if you're interested in the book, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it in Barnes & Noble if anybody still physically goes to a bookstore anymore. The best price to get it, and you get a personalized inscription from Art, an autographed copy from Art, is our website. We do own some of the books, some of the inventory. It's isthislegalthebook.com, isthislegalthebook.com. It's the best price on the market, cheaper even than Amazon, because we control certain inventory, and Art will give a personalized inscription for you. For some unknown reason, you would want my signature. I'd be happy to sign for you, but you don't want mine. You want the great Art Davies. Isthislegalthebook.com.
I agree. And, I am looking forward to the end of the year, my birthday, and plans are tentative as always, but I'm looking for a Las Vegas destination. If you happen to come by, hit me up. If you have to.
Right on, man. Right on.
any UFC, for the fans, that is. Maybe we can catch you at a bar somewhere. But, I'm just.
I got to get you to bare knuckle too, pal. I got to get you to bare knuckle.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to work on it. Oh, yeah, that as well. I appreciate you, Sean. Everybody check out the next bare knuckle fighting championship. And we appreciate you, Sean, for being on the Fight Report. And best of luck to you, man. Can't wait till the next one.
Sean, you're the best, man. Thank you. Speak to you soon. All the best. Thank you.